Hello, welcome back. It's Shawnee. Listen, I don't have to be a psychologist for a good week and a half, so you're going to get whatever I decide to serve you in terms of hair, okay? Actually, starting tomorrow, it'll probably be back in twists, but hi. So, a few of you, like two, were like, yes, we do want to know about more of the palettes that you used this year the most. I'm sure that I should switch those phrases around. But anyway, this video is just going to be like round two of the palettes I used the most this year. So I already did the palettes I for real used the most. This is like the second most used palettes. There are quite a few. So before we get into that, let me tell you what's on my eyes. I actually used the Minka palette from Adept Cosmetics. I went in with the namesake Minka along with the shade Luna, and I put those on top of my, here it is, Natasha Denona Work and Set in Black. So I did a video a while ago showing you what it looks like to use a black base for like your duochromes and multichromes, and compared it to using like a more skin tone base and then a nude, which on me was kind of white. So check that out. But I did use a black base today because I wanted kind of a smoky, sultry look, just in case you need to know what I'll look like if you want me to go with you to your like New Year's Eve party. Okay, so that was the Minka palette from Adept Cosmetics. That isn't one that is on my list of like most used because this is the first time I've used it, but I actually do have quite a few Adept Cosmetics palettes that I used this year, and they're pretty much all of them. So in my other video, I let you know that I used the Heather Austin Adept Cosmetics palette before, and I did also use the other three that I have pretty frequently. Now, Plain Jane Remastered is like my favorite one. It has all these very pretty shades. I will say that the shades, there are some that kind of look the same. They give you that same purpley pink look. So it reminds me of like, you know how Pat McGrath has a lot of pinks, a lot of golds, but we all feel like they're all just a little bit different. That is what this Adept Plain Jane Remastered palette reminds me of, but I really enjoy using it, and ever since I tried using it with different bases, I feel like the looks that I can now create have really expanded. So I would say after the Heather Austin one, this is the one that I use the most. Now, the thing with this one that's different from the Heather Austin is the Heather Austin palette has mattes, and this is just all duo and multi-chromes. So if you're the kind of person that needs a matte in there, you will probably have to pull from another palette. But yeah, I really enjoy it. I'm fine with going ahead and getting another palette for a matte for the look I currently have on, because the Minka palette, oh, this does have two mattes in there, but I didn't use the mattes from the palette. I just used my Natasha Denona Blackest Black, and this is the Gold Rush one, so it has like sparkles of gold in it, and it's just a single shadow that's a black, and I used that with that palette. So the other two Adept palettes that I used were the Amunet palette, which is this one here. I have a video on this one going over the shades and doing swatches, and then Ninhydrin here. Now, the reason that I used these quite a bit is that I was trying to use every shade at least once, and so that meant that I was using them quite a bit before like talking about my experience with them. So those are the Adept Cosmetics palettes that I used the most this year. Essentially, Adept is one of the brands I use the most, period. Okay, let's move on to these two. And I picked these two because they're very similar. There's the Cosette Crystal Cream Shadow Collection palette in this like padded palette compact. Just a bunch of cream shadows. And then there is the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 3 palette. And this is the larger one that has the like smaller eyeshadow pans and then these 4 face colors or whatever. Now, I say these are similar because I think there are just similar colors in there and it's like a similar formula, but I will say that I prefer the Danessa Myricks over the Cosette, except I don't like this shade here. What is that? Orion, because it's pretty much just a glitter and I'm not a fan of putting glitter on my eyes. So there's that. And I will say that I rarely touch these 4 here in the middle. I had that palette that was just the 4 face shades and I sent it over to Dion from Dion Loves Makeup. But I like barely use these at all. Now, I will say that when I use this palette or even the Cosette one, because they are cream shadows, essentially they're gonna crease. I mean, y'all, I thought Rose was coming in here. She be sneaking up on me. Oh, there she is. Hi, girl. Hey! You want to say hi? Yeah? Mm-hmm. You want to say hi? Okay. Oh. Yeah, she didn't want to say hi to you. I tried to get her, but Rose was like, no, I'm not going to talk to my adoring fans today. Okay, so as I was saying, with the Cosette and the Danessa Myricks, because they have this cream formula, my experience has been that they will crease, and so you really do have to be mindful of that. I mean, I have put it on without the proper base, and then I like looked in the mirror a little bit later on in the day and was horrified at how much creasing there was, because your eyes are, you're blinking and all that stuff, whatever else eyes do. And so they're gonna crease. So I can really understand why some people don't like cream shadows, period. Now, what I have started to do is to use one of my Danessa Myricks matte color fix, pretty much kind of any of them as a base, and for sure the matte ones. And then once that dries, I tap a little bit of whatever shade I'm going for on top of it. And that I have found has been the best way to use it. And I've used the Cosette ones more as liners than as like full-on eyeshadows. I do feel like I can declutter one of them. I'm leaning towards decluttering the Cosette one just because the Danessa Myricks one has a lot more shades, but I'm not quite sure yet. I just find that I think of them as very, very similar, but again, I seemed to enjoy using them this year. I do think that part of it was me trying to figure out the best way of applying them, and so that meant that I was using them quite a bit just to kind of try different techniques and try different bases. The base is like what gets you, y'all. Another brand that I used quite a bit, I talked about it in my most used palettes, is Blend Bunny Cosmetics. So their Surge palette is one of the palettes I use the most this entire year. And then right after that are the Blends and the Dollhouse palettes. Blends is one that is just a bunch of mattes that I enjoy. It's kind of like any matte that you need. You've got all of your colors, but you've also got like a brown, a black, and a white in there. So this is really nice to complement other eyeshadow palettes that you might have. And then the Dollhouse one is just this really pretty, like, cool toned palette with shimmers and mattes. Like the top row is a shimmer, bottom row is shimmer, and the middle rows are the mattes. I've talked before that I could get rid of this second row here just because it's pretty light for my skin tone. They do still show up though, so they are good for like blending things out. I still think Surge overall is my favorite because of the mix of mattes and shimmers and the mix of colors. Definitely this one leans a bit cooler and lighter, and then of course blends is just all mattes. But I got a lot of use out of this brand this year for sure. Now, a palette that is like, I don't think you can get it anymore, but I do know that quite a few of us have it, is the Hummingbird palette from Odin's Eye and the Fancy Face. This is a palette that I actually do get a good amount of use out of. I often will just pick one of these shimmers and pair it with a matte from another palette. Like, I know this week I went in and I used this, wait, I'm trying not to, how do you, okay. I went in and I used this shade here that is Fancy for the Fancy Face, and I used that with a matte from another palette. Just put that color all over the eye. I really enjoy the shimmers in this palette, and I know that Odin's Eye had this one with Tina, and then they had two other ones in this collection from two other creators. This was the only one I got because Tina is the one that I watch pretty frequently. I've been watching Tina's channel for years now, and I love supporting her. She's so well deserving when she gets these like collabs and stuff like that, because she has been around for years. So I was really happy to get this, and I do like and appreciate that I can still get some looks out of it. This is the only Odin's Eye palette that I own, and I'm glad that I am sure to keep using it because the shades are very pretty. Now, we all know that I have a lot of Lethal Cosmetics shades, a lot of their singles, a lot of their pre-made palettes. One that surprised me that I don't see anyone else using is the Lethal Cosmetics and Jolena palette. Like, I didn't know who Jolena is. I went ahead and looked her up on Instagram and found her, and this is the palette that she put together. This is one where I will often pop out a few of these and use them as singles. It's a really eclectic palette, I think, but the colors are very pretty, very nice. There are some like covert duochromes in here, but this is a palette where I was able to take like a couple of shades and just like use them together, and I was surprised at how much use I actually got out of this palette because I have so much Lethal. But it was nice because this is already put together in terms of a color story, and I ended up using it quite a bit, just kind of randomly pulling it out if I wanted to use have a Lethal Cosmetics formula and some shades that I already knew I liked. Like, these are all kind of shades that I typically wear, the purples and the orangey reds, and I'm getting more into the blues and the greens. Now, I also used a lot this Gemini 2 from Melt Cosmetics. In my like very most used, I talked about the Amor y Mariposas palette from Melt, and this is the palette that I used second to that. So I got quite a few looks out of this palette. I mainly focused on these shades here. I just have a harder time with greens. I'm getting more into greens. If you've seen pictures and videos and stuff, I'm doing more blues and greens and stuff like that. But the shades that I tend towards are these here. And I did say, like, I wonder why on earth they have these greens and stuff. And someone was like, it's like a flower, like it's like a rose. If you look at it, like this is a rose right here, you guys. This is a rose. Isn't it? Is it? Who said that? Who are you wrong? But yeah, it's like a rose, right? Like this is the flower part and this is like the stem and the leaves. Somebody affirm what I'm saying, okay? But I used Gemini 2 a lot. I actually like these like thinner palettes that they have. I used to have the stacks. So if you remember, that was like back in the day, Melt had these stacks. I think the only thing they have in the stacks right now is like their contour thingamajiggy, but I used to have like all the melt stacks, and so now I'm getting the palettes themselves because they kind of got rid of the stacks as far as I'm aware. There is one palette that I decluttered, and that was the Melt Mary Jane palette. I know some people love that palette. On me, it just looked like I went outside and like went up, I like leaned down and put my face in the dirt and just came up with a look. And I was like, no, you have to go. Now, this year, I've been trying to be more purposeful in using my Pat McGrath palettes. I find that I often save them for like a special occasion. Girl, what special occasions do you have? Like, none. Okay, so I was like, we need to like rethink that and just use the palettes. So I noticed that I actually used her more recent Mothership Mega Celestial Nirvana quite a bit since it came out. So this is one of the palettes that I used a bit more this year, even in comparison to her other Mega Motherships. And I think when I'm comparing this palette to the other Mothership Megas and even Pat McGrath's like Motherships in general, I feel like the formula is a little different. I find that the mattes are smoother and softer, and as well as the shimmers. Everything works incredibly well. I know sometimes folks will struggle with some of her mattes, like they're too hard pressed or something. I feel like every shade in here works so incredibly well, and I think that's why I ended up using it so much. Also, it has a nice like color gradient in here. I think it still kind of leans towards your pinks and purples. I think we just have to accept that that is Pat McGrath, but I can appreciate that she also has like the blues and the greens in there. You don't often see those in her palettes, honestly. So it was nice to see her switch it up, change it up a little bit, and have a bit more than just the pinks and purples and the golds that we already know we love. Now, it seems like the brand that I use the most is Natasha Denona. Like, apparently we're besties. So one of the palettes I used quite a bit is this Cupid palette. This is one of her 5-pan palettes. I think this is just such a nice, like, everyday palette for those of us who like the corals and the rosy tones. This is such an easy palette to work with. I've used the whole thing, or I've popped a couple of the shades out and used them as singles, but I've really enjoyed this palette a lot, especially out of all the other 5 pans that I have from her, the larger ones. This is the one that I use the most, and it's one of my most used palettes of 2022. Moving on to her mid-size palette, this is surprising to me. The one that I used the most was the Glam palette. Now, I didn't jump on the Glam bandwagon immediately. I really didn't. I was like, I don't want that. That looks super, like, boring to me. Lots of cooler tones, because they're not full-on just cool tones, but lots of cooler tones. Lots of, to me, I look at it and it's just like gray and grayish. And I was like, what am I going to do with that palette? The only reason I bought this palette was because my friend Tracy was like, it's a great palette on deeper skin tones. And this was before I even really knew Tracy like that. So I took a chance, and if I hadn't liked it, like, we would not have been friends, apparently, I think. But I have used this palette quite a bit. I use it often on days where I am working and I just want something that is going to be nice and easy. I enjoy it a lot more than I thought. Now, I know when this palette came out, a lot of folks were a bit upset that the shades are labeled as to where Natasha Denona suggests that you put them. Natasha Denona, in my opinion, is not the best with diversity and stuff like that. But for me, I don't really pay attention to where it says to put the shades because I believe the original layout is definitely for someone with a lighter skin tone. So that just doesn't apply to me. So I just go ahead and I use the palette the best way that fits for me. And I enjoy it. Like, I enjoy these shimmers. I think that's what I really like in the palette. The shimmers are just really nice, and it's really convenient just to have mattes that go with them already. But this is probably the biggest surprise to me, that I just kind of like unintentionally pulled for this palette more than some of my other ones. And I thought I used my other mid-size palettes a lot, but apparently this is the one I use the most, which, when I tell you I'm so surprised. Okay, now I have some of her larger palettes. Are these the last ones? Yes, I have some of her larger palettes, and the ones that I use the most are, wait, hold on. How y'all be doing it with long hair? Like, where is it? There we go. Jesus. Okay, so one of them that I use quite a bit is Sunset. Now, I love this palette just because of the warmer tones, and I used this a lot, apparently. I actually thought it would be Sunrise, which is the mid-sized one that has similar tones, but no, it was Sunset. I used this palette quite a bit this year. Again, I really love the shimmers in here. Initially, I was like, what am I supposed to do with this shade, this yellow here? But it actually works well with quite a few of the shimmers in this palette. It's a good shade to use to like blend things out. And yeah, it was a palette that I enjoyed using this year. Another one that has a pretty bold color story that I used a lot this year is the Natasha Denona Circo Loco. Now this one is one that I was like immediately attracted to. And I even did a video with, I think, Dion and Gel Beauty 87, Grace, and we did like rows. Each person took a row and did a look. But even outside of that, I used this palette for some of the shades. If I wanted something like colorful and easy to work with, then this was definitely the palette that I would choose. Really like this palette. And here's another one that surprised me, kind of, because this is the palette that I often will use if I need a look for doing a presentation and I know I'm going to be on camera or something. I like to have like a neutral palette that's going to look good with just about anything that I put on as well. And that is the Natasha Denona Biba palette. I think I also just have to accept that I do a lot of wearable, work appropriate looks. I just have to accept it, okay? Thank you. So this is a palette that I got a lot of use out of this year. I want to say over the past couple of years, honestly, especially with the pandemic and working from home. If I want something that I know is going to look good and it's not going to be like this. It's not going to be like super distracting or anything. I'm just going to be able to pull everything together with a nice eyeshadow look. It's actually a lot more versatile than I thought it would be, like especially when you add in this deep black here and the shimmers are just really pretty. You can get a variety of looks out of this. It's interesting that Biba and Glam are the ones I'm like, those are so one note. You can't do anything with those. They're ones that are actually very, very versatile. Okay, so that was round 2 of my most used palettes of the year. I think I could do a round 3. I think there are a couple that are like the third phase, but I don't know, y'all. I do not know. If you really, really, really want to see it, let me know and I'll see how many I have that's like the third tier of most used. But hopefully some of this was helpful. I do hope that you're continuing to check in and take care of yourself. Thank you to those of you who check in on me. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Anyway, be sure to like the video, please, and also feel free to subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you watching. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time.